Welcome to the Conscious Investor. Let's get started. Hey, welcome back to the Conscious Investor. I am so excited. I have been waiting months for this conversation with John Blanton. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, Julie, thank you. I'm looking really forward to it. So I appreciate you having me on.
Well, one of the reasons I've been looking forward to having you on the show so much is that I really appreciate people that are grounded and pushing the thought bubbles, like past the comfort zone, and everything that you do, from your podcast to the interviews on other podcasts to everything what you create on social media, is always pushing people past their comfort zone and saying, hey, have you thought about this?
Absolutely. I mean, there's always alternatives, right? And I think that that's one thing, just kind of the American dream, right? I mean, that's kind of the path that I had taken. You want to go to college, earn six figures, and then you just kind of plug away as much as you can into your retirement account until you ride off into the sunset. And just early on, I realized that, that wasn't necessarily the direction that I wanted to go. And some childhood experiences kind of lended me to pursuing alternative paths as well. And I just, I really want to empower others and really allow them to know there's so much more out there to you, even though, no one's going to feel sympathy for, somebody that's a high income earner. But, it's a lot more shallow than people realize, right? At the end of the day, it is just money, right? And I think that's what I'm really trying to push people to, is pursue the life that they want and then find ways to create income and revenue streams that align with the life that you want versus, find those revenue streams and then try to build a life around that.
Oh, I love that. So what are you doing? In this first segment, we're going to just talk about you. We'll talk about you. Don't worry. I know that you like to talk about yourself all the time. Okay. But, let's just get a heartbeat on what is it that you are doing right now in life? What makes John John? Who are you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so a few months ago, I decided to leave my corporate career. So I've been in corporate sales for a little bit over 10 years and, fortunately was quite successful, but realized a couple years in that I just really didn't have that much control over my ability to earn, right? If the company chose to change the commission plan, or I'd been promoted and I attained all my goals. And then within 3 months of getting a fairly sizable bonus, they demoted me, because of company restructuring, and that prevented me from making this another $50,000 bonus. Right. And so you see things like that happen. You're like, hey, I hit all these parameters and I was just promoted. Like I thought I was doing all the right things, and then things are out of your control. And so I think I just started becoming a lot more intentional and mindful of, the more things that I can control in my life, the better I'm going to be able to build the life that I want. And so about 5 years ago, my wife and I started investing in real estate. And again, it was totally unintentional happenstance. Because of the company we worked at, we had a non-discriminatory 401k plan, and we could only put in an incremental amount of money into that. And so got into real estate a little bit, bought some properties. Again, not intentional, just if a broker sent me a deal, I'd look at it. I wasn't really, grassroots or, really attacking these. And so then for a couple of years, we stagnated a little bit more. And then kind of same thing was like, hey, we really need to find ways to generate additional streams of income. So started looking at private lending and flipping. And, that's a huge struggle in and of itself. Thankfully didn't lose any money on projects, but made a lot less than I should have. And then here most recently, got a little bit into the multifamily space. And so started investing in some syndications, active operator on a few smaller deals myself here in North Carolina. And then currently, just continuing to pursue deals. My wife's actually started to acquire a few companies herself. So she actually acquired 2 businesses during COVID, just small businesses, and, just helping her manage those. Then obviously helping coach others to kind of, build that mindset and that process and that architecture to really get them to where they want to be and have that lifestyle and that lifestyle design.
Okay, you said like a million things that I have to circle back to. I always go, if I was listening to this, what questions would I ask? And you said something like right out of the gate. Well, some things happened in my childhood that just kind of let me, we have to go there. Like, tell me, what was it in your childhood that kind of laid a foundation from the very get-go?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it wasn't anything substantially negative. I had a very fortunate upbringing, kind of the nuclear family. My mom stayed at home and my dad worked, and, my dad traveled quite a bit. And so that was just one thing that was really important to me growing up was I want to always be around for my kids. Not that my dad wasn't around, we have a great relationship, and we were there, but that was just one thing again, that was important to me that again, kind of this lifestyle design could have pursued other career paths in the meantime that had more travel and more opportunities financially, but that was something that I intentionally chose not to pursue because that was important to me to be around for my family. The other thing was he had a very successful my dad had a very successful corporate career, and this is a little bit later on in life, but he ended up getting bought out by private equity and chewed up and spit out, and through that he had assigned so much of his self-worth to his career, right, and all this that he had worked towards his whole career, right, and he did really well. And obviously, being bought out by private equity isn't the worst thing in the world, financially, right? You get, but deep down inside of him, he was really beaten down. And again, that was, when I was, kind of a young professional. So it wasn't childhood, but it was another part of my life that really kind of just ingrained in my head. Like, I want to have control over this. I don't ever want to have somebody kind of just control that. And then also just, I don't ever want to be defined by just one thing, unless they're like, hey, John's a great person or John's a great dad and father or husband or whatever, outside of those things, I don't want to be like, hey, John's a, investor, John's a salesperson or whatever, right? I never want to be kind of defined by one of those things. Those can be part of making up who I am as a person, but I just never want to allow just one thing to be defined of who I am, at least from a career or, livelihood perspective.
Okay, well, that kind of lends itself even into just watching your dad, that imprint into your life. And then you fast forward, you're being, your company restructures, you're this high performing overachiever, knocking out all of the, goals, and then you're demoted. Did you see the correlation between the two? Was it one of those obvious type things, or?
Yeah, no, it's funny that you say it like that. No, not really. I mean, I think it was just kind of like, more breadcrumbs kind of leading you to the answer, right? It was just like, hey, like, who's really in control here? And I think it just was like, kind of someone like pulling the back of your shirt. You're like, okay, like, I'm not really in control. Like, as much as, at the end of the day, I mean, this is the company's business, right? They can choose to fire me at any point in time. They can choose to grossly impact, my ability to earn, my customer base, whatever they want. And so I think, it's funny that you say it like that, but I think it was more just, I don't know if I saw it that, like for like, but I think it was more just another example of, when you have your income is dependent upon one stream or one individual or one company, there's a lot of risk there. And I mean, it depends how you define risk, right? I mean, fortunately, we probably weren't going to not have food on the table if I lost my job, but, it would have been stressful and it would have been an emotional period of our life. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it was just one of those other scenarios. It's like, you look outside and you're like, hey, there's another person that's kind of having, tough luck from a corporate career. And I've just heard it and seen it too many times. And, I had a really tough decision to make. I could have just quit, or I could have, stuck it out and stayed there. And I decided to stick it out because in my head, I knew that wasn't going to be my long-term goal, was to build this career. But, if I was, if I didn't have the thought process and a little bit less mature at the time, I would have just quit. I mean, I came very close to just quitting because there's a lot of other circumstances that were not fun in that scenario. And I decided I'm just going to stick it out, but I'm going to start making this job work for me instead of me working for the job. And that's when I started doing the flipping and pursuing these other ventures and and I mean, just frankly working a lot less, because I knew that if I invested time in these other avenues, those are things that would retain and stay with me regardless if I stayed at that company or not. And so I think that's, a question just for a lot of people when they're in these corporate situations is, are you going to stick it out because, 2 or 3 years more in your current circumstance might lead to you being free, versus if you jump ship, now you're starting all over again. How is your income impacted? Now you're low man or woman on the totem pole. If a corporate restructuring happens there, are they kicking you out the door? So, there's all these circumstances and, a lot of the customers I supported were, folks that had been in corporate for a long time. And that was another thing that really impacted me because they were just, I'm just kind of biding my time, waiting to get laid off. And it's just like, these are senior people that, that have had, tremendous careers. And it just seemed like, is that somewhere I wanted to be in 20 or 30 years, where I'm just waiting for my, for my moment to get laid off, to get my big package and then ride off into retirement. And, that was just another thing to me that was just like, this just isn't life the way I want to live it. And so that was kind of really what imprinted me, and, deciding to kind of pursue alternative paths and strategies.
What's interesting is that I was, tying this into even government jobs. So, stepping away from the corporate setting, but going to the government setting. When I was a classroom teacher, I started teaching in the public schools at age 22. And during those I transferred jobs to a different school district and got into the premier one, right? Anyway, that's the first year I was there, they handed out pink slips. And that was my reality check. It's like, you know what? People think that if I go work for the government, if I have a federal job or a state job, or I work for the county, right? Whatever municipality it is, that I am set for life and I'm going to have a pension, I'm going to have this and that. And the reality is there are layoffs. Layoffs happen regardless what industry you are in, the layoffs happen. It's just part of life and a reality. And so you have to be saying, hey, who do I want to be? And what do I want in my life?
100%. I mean, I have the ultimate respect for teachers. My sister-in-law is a teacher, and I just think for me, that's one of the hardest jobs, in the world, because, obviously, in my opinion, the majority of teachers are underpaid, and they're even starting to cut if you get, master's degrees and continuing education, and they're kind of lowering, how much they're even getting paid. And so I think that's a big part of it. I think the other side of the coin, kind of like championing, hey, control your destiny. It's scary, right? I mean, when you're in control,
so terrifying.
When you're in
it's
control,
all on you.
100%. And I think that's the factor that people need to weigh is, which risk makes more sense in your life. Does it make more sense to bet on yourself? And I'm a salesperson, I'm kind of a gambler. And so, I'd rather say, hey, I'll figure this out. And if I don't, I'll just go get some crummy sales job, and, at least we'll be able to survive. And, we live fairly conservatively, for what we've done. And so, I think that's the other side of it is, if you're going to be stressed out all the time, being an entrepreneur sounds exciting and sexy, but if you're going to be stressed out all the time about like, oh my gosh, where's this next paycheck coming from? Or I need this transaction to happen or hit, are you going to start looking at doing things when, sorry, I totally lost my train of thought. But yeah, are you going to do things that aren't necessarily who you are as a person because you feel that you have to, right, to make ends meet? And so I think that's kind of the balance that people have to weigh. And that's, the transition that my wife and I made was kind of incremental. It was like, okay, let's add this stream, let's add that stream, let's add this, so that if shit does hit the fan and, we're kind of in a tough spot, we have means and we have different streams and scenarios that we can fall back on. And so that's why I think it's not just this, shoot from the hip, kind of all or nothing type scenario. And I think especially for parents and working parents, I think that's, in my opinion, the best strategy is to make it more of an incremental type of process instead of just a rip the Band-Aid off. And I mean, it's going to be different for everybody, but, I think a lot of people are like, hey, I don't have any sources of additional income outside of my career, should I quit my job? It's like, I really think you should invest in these other avenues, and kind of really understand them first, because I think that's one thing we're going to talk about a little bit later too, but just kind of, you have to make sure that it aligns with who you are as a person and what you want to pursue.
Completely. And, if you burn the ships, like what you're talking about and describing that stress, I'm just going to jump into this topic of freedom for a second, because I see, and you and I see this all the time within our spheres over on LinkedIn, especially. It's like, everybody's going for their freedom. It's so cliche. It's cliche. I'm going to have financial freedom. And it's like, what the heck does that even mean to you? So I was at this conference, and it was, one of those premier conferences this summer. We got to meet in person, and I heard so many people saying, freedom, I want my financial freedom. And really, I said this, and it's not very popular, but I'm like, what does that actually mean? And you've alluded to this. If you're just trading one job for another job, like, okay, great, you quit your W-2, we're celebrating that, hurrah. And I am happy if that's the path somebody is taking. I am cheering them on. But right now, I think there's so many people that are misguided, where they think, oh, I'm going to have this financial freedom and I'm going to be in control of all of my time, and my life's my destiny, blah, blah, blah. And they've drink the Kool-Aid, not realizing great, I'm at this point where I can leave my W-2. Oh no, now I work harder than ever, but I'm working for myself. Like you're just trading something. Like what is really actually going to serve your life the best? And it might be, working harder for yourself. I mean, but I don't know that people actually digest that.
No, I mean, I think that's 1,000% true. And I think that's kind of where the intentionality comes in for, what do people really want? And for me, I mean, I'll just say, I want to make 25, 30 grand a month and work 10 to 15 hours a week on stuff I really care about. Right. I
Yeah.
don't need to be ultra rich, I mean, and not mean, depending on who you are, like, I think that's good. I mean, that's good means, right? You're living a nice life, but you're not, a multimillionaire. And, with inflation and the economy, who knows how comfortable life you'll be living. But I mean,
Hey,
I think
lower
that's
middle
kind of what
class in a few years, buddy.
exactly. Well, and I think that's kind of, when you think about things, it's like, okay, for me, it's the time effort that's involved. And again, not all weeks are going to be 10 to 15 hours. Some weeks are going to be 50 or 60 hours, right? But it's
Mhm.
it's being able to kind of, weather those or feather those in, right? And just like, some weeks may only be 5 hours on things, but it's on, again, it really comes back to things that I really care about and want to work on. And I think that's when you start stacking these different streams, you're going to be able to be in a little bit more control of like, I do want to do that. I don't want to do that. And I think that's kind of where, if you're working for yourself and that's your sole source of income, it's still just a single point failure. It doesn't matter if it's a job or for yourself. If it's just one avenue that you're creating revenue and income for your family and yourself, in my opinion, I think that's still a risky proposition, even if you're betting on yourself.
Yeah, you know what? Don't bet on yourself. No, I'm kidding. So there are some things that I would not bet on myself on. So just be real with yourself. So how did you and your wife decide? Was there a conversion moment where you guys both just had this, like, was it an epiphany of like, oh my gosh, we have to have multiple income streams and we're gonna totally change our lifestyle? Or was this something that you kind of had and it grew, like a thought that grew into something bigger?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was always a thought in the back of our mind. Like, I'm sure probably most couples are, hey, we don't want to retire at 65, right? Hey, can we retire at 50 or can we retire at 45 or 40? And I think that was kind of the goal was like, hey, can we retire, closer to that 40 time frame? That was kind of we had kids somewhat young. And so we were just like, hey, that would be enough. Our kids would start close to be getting into college and stuff. And so, I think that was kind of how it first started. And then as we got into it, we realized, this curve, you can really accelerate it at your leisure, right? If you really want to jump in and, kind of take on more risk, there's more upside and there's more wins that you can have, right? And so I think, we're kind of part of, this gross, asset bubble curve, whatever you want to call it, right? That we've picked up a lot of opportunity and success because of that, but we've also kind of, reached our arms out to try to grab some of it. And so I think, initially it was, I guess I'm 34, so I'll turn 35 in next year. And so I think 40 was kind of that time horizon that we were looking for, right? And then all of a sudden, a couple opportunities came about that ended up expediting us faster. And the one thing that so she was pretty anti, being an entrepreneur at all, right? And so she just was like, hey, I do really well, and she's extremely successful in her career. And so, I think, but she's like, now that like we're kind of building this life that we want, she's all about it. And so, I think she's just kind of still, trying to feel out ultimately how she wants to pursue things and go down that path. But as I said, I mean, she owns multiple small businesses now and, and is operating those and, has a career and is a mother. And so, I think she's seeing kind of this bigger picture now of what our life can really look like. And, especially as our daughters get older, we want to be around because, who knows what the world's going to be like. I mean, with phones and social media and all that stuff, I think we just want to make sure that we're there to support them so that they can be the best and efficient kids ever. So, I mean, I think we started off with it being like a 9 or 10 year process, and thankfully we were able to kind of condense it down to 4 or 5 years. But, that took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And, we lost a lot of money on opportunities, and, thankfully we were able to gain quite a bit, as well.
It's a process, but it's remarkable to have, a couple that is united, has like a clear vision, because a lot of times, couples will have a shared essence, if you will, where, hey, yeah, we both believe in this, but how to go about it creates more conflict than it does resolution or intentional pursuit of it. And so I just think that that's really amazing and a really great example for everyone out, who's listening. Like, that says go follow John. They haven't figured out.
Trying to, we don't have it figured out. And I mean, I think that's kind of the point, is we're just trying different things. And I think that's kind of goes back to like the flipping or private lending. Like private lending is great, right? You just loan, I just did one right now, a couple months, or he just paid me back yesterday. And I mean, it's nice because you just lend someone money and they just pay you, it's 12 points and 2%. And so it's like, hey, I'm just sitting here collecting a couple $100 a month. And I mean, I'm literally doing nothing, and it's collateralized by a property. And so, but then I realized that that's great, but it wasn't expediting the curve in the way that I wanted. And then I did flipping. And again, that was a job. So I was like, well, that's no different than trading my time for dollars, and then I was able to get into multifamily. And now we're looking at some of these business opportunities. And, and again, you kind of have to, you add some of them in, right? That's why it's the 10 to 15 hours a week. But if you're intentional and if you're actually producing value during those work hours, we're checking stuff or researching or prospecting or doing other things at other times, but that's stuff that we want to do. And so I think, that's really the big portion, is just, again, being intentional and making sure that you're being fruitful and valuing your own time and efforts.
Yeah, time is precious, and it's easy to escape. It's easy to just hop into your office, your studio, whatever you're in, and get lost in a project. I'm speaking for myself, throwing myself under the bus, and I have to have a clear idea. The clarity is key for me in keeping me on track, or my time just all of a sudden 3 hours is gone. And I'm thinking, where did those 3 hours go? I mean, I was being, quote, productive, but where did those 3 hours go? So how do you hold yourself accountable for your time?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, the big thing is my morning routine, making sure that I get that, locked in. And, obviously it's a moving target sometimes, especially having young kids, they're starting to get more activities, and I'm more of a morning person anyways, but unfortunately they are too, so sometimes they're up at 5:45 or 6 or whatever, so I'm kind of having to push my time forward. But, it's really for me writing things down, right? And, having that checklist throughout the day, and of, what are the must-haves that I must accomplish today, right? And I think that's the one, I keep racking my brain about it, but I think the one that's most important for anything is just deal flow, right? And I was even kind of thinking about it as, or just acquisitions in general. How can you acquire more income streams, and how can you acquire more customers, right? If you're doing both of those things at any given time, you're going to be successful, right? And then the caveat to that is, how do you become more efficient in both of those, right? How do you become more efficient at either spending less time in that income stream and making the same amount of money, or making more money in the same amount of time? And then how do you find ways to acquire customers or deals or assets in a much easier process, right? And so I think those are kind of some of the things that I try to do, is like, what can I do from a prospecting perspective, but then also what can I do to potentially become more efficient? Or, am I not looking at these things in the same, am I just looking at these things with tunnel vision? If there's an alternate perspective that I can look at to see if there's other avenues to go down to, to kind of reach those goals and attain what I'm looking for.
Okay, efficiency. That's huge. So what is one thing that shifted for you with efficiency on any of this?
I mean, again, kind of going back to writing things down, I think just being a salesperson, and we're ingrained to kind of document. And, we kind of are pretty bad at it, right? Because we're more oral, and we're talking, and, and it's just kind of a headache sometimes to document all of your research and all that stuff. But I think that's one thing that I've started to do, documenting, my prospecting calls, documenting my emotions, documenting different things, just so that I can make sure that I'm, that I'm in line, because I think we all go through these ebbs and flows of emotions. And, we get hyped up about something because we went to a conference, or because we met somebody that, was really enlightening, and, they got us excited about it. And then a week later, we're just like, oh man, like I'm feeling really down. And so I think just making sure to manage those ebbs and flows, so that the down times aren't so down, and that the high times aren't so high. And, especially being a salesperson, that's difficult. But, I think that's one of the things, is just making sure, kind of writing things down, and just making sure that you're holding yourself accountable to those actions that are imperative that you accomplish on a day in, a day out basis. And a lot of that's personal time too, right? Hey, I've got to go pick up my kids with my wife every evening, or, when we're at the dinner table, no phones from 5 to 7, when we're spending time with our kids. So there's a lot of things too that aren't necessarily just business, related, that are just like, am I becoming the person that I want to be? And, how do I hold, so my wife and I obviously try to do our best to, to hold each other to those standards as well, especially around our daughters and things.
That's super powerful. And those examples, I just think about the example with technology. And I mean, I throw myself again, I'm throwing myself under the bus, but I look at the example I set with my phone and such. And we were having breakfast yesterday morning, and my phone was separate from everybody else, but sometimes it's not. I think I went and put it away, and then I realized I like took my husband's phone gently, because I know what our goals are. We have the shared vision and shared goal of being together and to be intentional about that time together. It's slipping through our fingers because our kids are getting older. And so I put his phone away, and we both looked at each other. We knew it was happening, and we said it in front of the kids because we're their role models for how to do this, and we're imprinting on them. It's like, you guys are right here and we need to be here. This is our focus and attention right now. But it has to start with some level of awareness. So good for you guys for starting when the kids are young. Like, really, really awesome. John, this is fantastic. I love just getting a snapshot overview of who are you and what do you have to offer. And I know that this is going to be just everything we've already spoken about is going to provide a level of challenge for listeners, especially when they're like, oh my gosh, I'm older than him. Hey, if you're older than John, it's not a big deal. Everybody lives their own journey, and you don't need to feel any sense of pressure or, oh, I haven't achieved or arrived somewhere. Like, live the life that unfolds before you. That's your life. And so if everyone does that, you will be satisfied and fulfilled. John, best ways for people to get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. And no, I really appreciate I'm having a lot of fun. So I appreciate you having me on. So the best way is my website, contrariancashflow.com, or LinkedIn, obviously, John Blanton or Contrarian Cashflow. So no, absolutely. Really appreciate the time.
I love it. Listeners, you guys are amazing. If you are getting anything of value from this, make sure that you drop a review so that we know that this episode just like rocked your world and helped you level up. Until next time, live big, love bigger. Overwhelmed by apartment syndication but want to learn more? Let me help you press the easy button. Head over to 3keysinvestments.com and download Syndication Made Simple. I explain simply how the process works, who's involved, and how you can get started today. You're smart, and with this simple guide, you'll be able to understand the process. Head over to 3keysinvestments.com and download Syndication Made Simple.